Do you know this criminal? I bet you do. His face may not be immediately familiar to you, but you have heard his name before. His influence has haunted the halls of American justice since 1966. Police think of his name every time they arrest someone. His name? Ernesto. Well, that's his first name. His last name, I'll reveal after I tell his story. Ernesto was born in 1941 and unfortunately started a life of crime rather early. His first criminal conviction was when he was in the 8th grade. The following year, boom, another conviction for burglary, for which he was sent to reform school. A few years later, he was arrested and convicted again for driving a stolen car. But it was his arrest in 1963 in Phoenix, Arizona, that made his name famous, or rather infamous, might be more accurate. For this arrest, he was placed in a police lineup, and according to the police, at least what they told Ernesto, that he was positively identified by the victim, 18-year-old Lois Ann Jameson.
Can you describe the man?
Number one looks like him.
The accusation? The crime of kidnapping, and the R word, which rhymes with grape, which YouTube's algorithm doesn't like. After the lineup, and after being told by police that he was identified, Ernesto believed them and agreed to make a handwritten confession. He was directed by the police to write at the top of the page, "This statement has been made voluntarily and of my own free will, with no threats, coercion, or promises of immunity, and with full knowledge of my legal rights. Understanding any statement I make can and will be used against me." Sounds like a slam dunk case. And in mid-June 1963, Ernesto was convicted and sentenced to 20 to 30 years in prison. Case closed. Done. Or was it? The only problem, Ernesto was never informed as to his legal right to have an attorney present when he was questioned, or his constitutional right to remain silent during interrogation. His lawyer, 73-year-old Alvin Moore, appealed to the Supreme Court, arguing that his client's constitutional rights were violated. The Supreme Court agreed, and in an historical landmark decision in 1966, overturned Ernesto's conviction. However, Ernesto's newfound freedom didn't last long, as Arizona retried and convicted him in 1967 to 20 to 30 years in prison. Surprisingly, he was paroled as early as 1972. But not being able to behave, he was sent back to prison for a few more years, but eventually he was released in 1976. But again, his freedom did not last long, because he was stabbed to death in 1976 in a bar in downtown Phoenix. Ernesto's name is famous, while his last name's famous. Ernesto Miranda. Ever since that Supreme Court decision called Miranda v. Arizona, police have to remind people in their custody that they have a constitutional right to a lawyer and they have a right to remain silent when interrogated. That is, if the police want any of the evidence gathered in interrogation to be admitted as evidence in court. Without this warning, any incriminating answers from the suspect can simply be thrown out of court, and a state's case could potentially crumble entirely. Some people have called this Miranda rights. Technically, that's not accurate. It's a Miranda warning, because these rights each American has by virtue of the Constitution. They're not new rights.
First thing I do, anyone know what they get told first when they're in an interview? Miranda warning. Okay, it's not a right. You don't have a right to Miranda. Those rights have always been there. It's called the Constitution. You're just teaching, you're doing a real quick class on the Constitution.
Now, SCOTUS, the Supreme Court of the United States, did not specify the exact wording of this warning, but simply the topics that it should cover. The typical warning sounds something like this, which you've all probably heard on TV, and hopefully not in person. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Do you understand the rights I have just read to you? With these rights in mind, do you wish to speak to me? Now, on this topic, I highly recommend this video, Don't Talk to the Police. Everyone should watch it. Even if you're entirely innocent of the crime you're suspected of, you have to watch what you say, because anything you say can and will be used against you in the court of law.
When you get stopped for a traffic ticket, everyone likes to be somewhat honest. And what's the first thing the police officer asks you? Do you know how fast you're going? If the speed limit's 35, you'll say, oh, 38, 40, because you want to be kind of honest even though you're doing 50. You just said 38, 40. You just admitted to breaking the law. You just confessed.
Now you're wise to the words. You also have the right to tase the like button or shoot the subscribe button. You also have the right to watch one of these videos. It's your right.